Welcome to Café Tales. I am Alie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin today in 1948 New York with the case of the missing tenor sax. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Settle in with a warm cup of coffee, stay curious, and let's ease into it. The case of the missing tenor. Sax Chapter 1, The Note That Never Played. I hadn't planned on spending Tuesday night in a smoky, jazz club in Harlem. That was Lily Rowan's territory, not mine. But Pete Vassos, an old army buddy who'd taken to writing about music for one of the downtown rags, had been badgering me for weeks to hear Luther Lux Rollins blow his tenor sax. He's rewriting the language, Archie, Pete had insisted. I don't speak saxophone, but I do speak friendship. So there I was, wedged at a corner table, nursing a mediocre scotch at the Blue Ember Club. The joint was packed tighter than Fritz's favorite sausages. The audience was mixed, about half white downtowners slumming for culture, half Harlem locals who knew what they were listening to. The band had been cooking for nearly an hour, but the star attraction hadn't appeared yet. According to Pete, that was standard procedure. Lux makes them wait. Part of the show. At exactly 11:30, the quartet on stage finished their number and the club went dark, except for a single spotlight on the bandstand. A tall, lean Negro in a midnight blue suit appeared, tenor saxophone gleaming under the light. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, just raised the horn to his lips and played a single haunting note that seemed to hang in the air like cigarette smoke. I'm no music critic, but even I could tell this was something different. The place was silent, except for that horn, which seemed to be telling a story no one had heard before, but everyone somehow remembered. At 11:55, Lux Rollins took a break while the band played on. Just wait, Pete whispered. The midnight solo is what everyone comes for. But midnight came and went. The pianist vamped, looking increasingly uncomfortable. At 12:10, the bandleader announced that the second set would begin shortly. I caught Pete's eye. He shrugged. Never happened before, he muttered. I wasn't being paid to investigate anything, but curiosity is an occupational hazard. I slipped out back, where I spotted a harried-looking man with thinning hair and a too-expensive suit arguing with the piano player. He never misses a set, Hector. Something's wrong. Just find someone who's seen him, Max. We've got a packed house. I returned to my table, waited through another 40 minutes of music without Lux, and called it a night. I didn't think about it again until the phone rang at the brownstone the next morning. Nero Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids as I took the call. A voice introduced itself as Hector Barnes, owner of the Blue Ember Club. I told him Wolfe's rates started at $100 a day, plus expenses, mainly to discourage him. But he didn't flinch. Mr. Goodwin, one of my staff saw you last night. Said you look like someone who notices things. Lux Rollins was murdered last night. I'm coming over. I was still considering whether to tell him Wolfe didn't care about dead saxophone players when he hung up. When I informed Wolfe we had a potential client arriving, his only response was a grunt, which I interpreted as grudging acceptance. At precisely 11 TIG, our morning business hours having officially begun, the doorbell rang and I admitted Hector Barnes to the brownstone. He was a compact man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and nervous hands that kept straightening his already straight necktie. I led him to the office and the red leather chair, where he perched like he might need to make a quick escape. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 11 on the dot, as immovable in his habits as in his bulk. He lowered himself into his custom chair, rang for beer, then clasped his hands over his middle and examined our visitor. Sir, you believe you require my services? Wasn't a question, but Barnes answered anyway. Mr. Wolfe, Luther Rollins was found dead this morning in an alley 3 blocks from my club. The police are calling it a mugging, but I don't believe it. Why not? Luke had enemies. Sure, anyone good does. But he also had information, and his saxophone case was found beside him, unopened, containing nothing but blank music sheets and a torn note. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, the closest he comes to showing surprise. The police shared these details with you? I have a relationship with the local precinct. Besides, my manager, Max Stone, used to be FBI. He called in some favors. I noticed Barnes hadn't actually answered the question. Wolfe sighed. Mr. Barnes, I have little interest in the demise of musicians, however talented. The police are equipped to handle such matters. My concern is reputation, not justice, Barnes said. My concern is $100 a day plus expenses, Barnes countered, pulling an envelope from his inside pocket and placing it on Wolfe's desk. That's $500 as a retainer. Wolfe made no move toward the money. What do you imagine I can accomplish? Find out who killed him, and why. Fritz entered with Wolfe's beer. After pouring and receiving the customary microscopic nod, Fritz departed. Wolfe took a long, slow sip, then set the glass down precisely on the coaster. Very well. I accept the commission. Archie will accompany you back to your establishment to begin inquiries. Good day, sir. It was only after Barnes had left to wait for me in the front room that I raised an eyebrow at Wolfe. That was quick. What's your interest? Wolfe picked up his current book, then set it down. A blank music sheet and a torn note about an encore. That never occurred. An obvious contradiction. I abhor contradictions. They offend reason. I knew better. There was something else that had caught his attention, but I wouldn't learn what until he was ready to tell me. Get your hat, Archie. You're going to a jazz club. Chapter 2. The Blank Sheets Hector. Barnes insisted on taking me to the Blue Ember in his Cadillac. It was newer than mine, which irked me slightly, but I'd get over it. During the drive uptown, I tried to get a better feel for him. How long have you owned the club? 2 years, Barnes said, navigating around a delivery truck. Bought it when it was a failing gin mill called the Nightcap. Took every penny I'd saved working 20 years as a booking agent. And Lux Rollins? 6 months ago. Best decision I ever made. Doubled our business in 3 weeks. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Now I've got a dead star and a reputation problem. The Blue Ember in daylight looked like what it was, a nightclub caught with its makeup off. The neon was dark, the facade shabby. A uniformed cop stood outside looking bored. Inside, chairs were stacked on tables and the air smelled of stale, smoke and spilled spirits. A lean, twitchy man of about 40 was counting bottles behind the bar, scratching figures in a notebook. He looked up when we entered. This is the detective I told you about, Max, Barnes said. Archie Goodwin works for Nero Wolfe. Maxwell Stone came around the bar, giving me an appraising look. He had the straight-backed posture of a man who once wore a uniform and still thought he did. FBI, 10 years, he said before I could ask. After the war, I wanted something different, less regulations. He didn't offer his hand. You were here last night. It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it as one. Show him around, Barnes instructed. I've got calls to make. He disappeared through a door marked private. Stone's tour was perfunctory. The main room with the bandstand, the bar along one wall, tables crowded too close together, the tiny kitchen, a storeroom in back. He answered my questions in clipped sentences that provided information without volunteering anything beyond what I'd asked. Yes, Lux was reliable. Never missed a set before. No, he didn't socialize much with the band. Yes, he arrived alone last night at his usual time, about an hour before his first set. No, Stone hadn't noticed anything unusual. What about the saxophone case? I asked. What? About it? The blank music sheets. The torn note. Stone's face remained impassive. Police business. I'm working for your boss, which makes it my business too. He barely concealed his irritation. The case wasn't touched. It was still locked. Whoever killed him didn't want his horn, which would be worth something. They wanted him. Or they wanted something else, I suggested. Stone didn't bite. Instead, he said, "We open at 7. Staff arrives at 5. If you want to talk to them, come back then." I did. But first I examined the alley where Lux's body had been found. It revealed nothing the police wouldn't have already seen. A narrow passage between buildings, poorly lit, with fire escapes overhead and puddles of questionable origin. Underfoot, a convenient place to die unobserved. When I returned at 5, the blue ember was stirring to life. A bartender was slicing lemons. 2 waiters arranged tables. A thin Negro man with nimble hands was checking the piano, playing occasional chords. The most interesting person, however, was behind the bar, restocking glasses. She was in her late 20s, blonde, with a figure that hadn't come from rationing. When she looked up, her eyes were an unusual shade of amber. "Can I help you?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm working for Mr. Barnes." "Melody Hayes." She dried her hands on a towel. "You're investigating what happened to Lux." "That's right. You work here long?" "About 4 months. I'm just filling in until something better comes along." "Like what?" "Like anything. Broadway, Hollywood. I'm an actress, not a waitress." "See anything unusual last night?" She hesitated. Lux seemed distracted, more than usual. I mean, he was always lost in his own head, but last night he kept looking at the door like he was expecting someone. "Anyone in particular?" "Seemed interested in him?" "Everyone was interested in him. That was the point." She went back to arranging glasses, but there was a group at the corner table. 3 men in expensive suits. I'd never seen them before. "Any connection to Vinnie Keys?" Her eyes narrowed. "You know about him?" "I know he was Lux's rival." Melody made a dismissive gesture. "Vinnie's all talk. He's playing at the Ruby Room down on 125th. Claims Lux stole his style, his band members, his spotlight. But musicians always talk that way." As if summoned by his name, the door swung open and a compact, expensively dressed Negro man entered. He moved like he owned not just the room, but the building, and possibly the block. "You Vincent Morris?" I asked. I introduced myself. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nero Wolfe, huh? Guess Barnes is worried about more than just bad publicity." He adjusted gold cufflinks. "I've got nothing to hide. I was leading my band at the Ruby Room when Lux checked out. 50 people can confirm it." "I didn't ask for your alibi." "You would have," he shrugged. "Lux and I had our differences, but I wouldn't kill the man. Bad business. His crowd follows him to the grave, not to my club." "Did he really steal your style?" Morris laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You don't know much about jazz, do you? Nobody steals anything. We borrow, we transform, we pay homage. But Lux..." He paused. "Lux had something nobody could steal. You either have it or you don't." He looked past me to the empty bandstand. "He was working on something new, something big. Said it would change everything." Blank music sheets don't change much, I said, watching his face. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed it. What do you mean, blank? His case was full of blank sheet music. Whatever he was working on is gone. Vincent Morris shook his head slowly. That's not possible. Lux kept everything in his head until it was perfect, then wrote it down. Said he didn't trust paper until the music was ready. If there were blank sheets in his case, then someone replaced his work. I finished. I spent another hour at the club gathering bits and pieces. The piano player confirmed Lux had been excited about a new composition. The bartender mentioned an argument between Lux and Stone a week earlier. By the time I left, I had a notebook full of contradictions and a growing suspicion that Lux Rollins had been more than just a man with a saxophone. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the plant rooms with Theodore, tending to some unpronounceable orchid. When we gathered in the office at 6 for his second business session of the day, I reported everything while he listened with his eyes half closed, occasionally sipping beer. Interesting, he said when I finished, but incomplete. Is that all? No. Someone followed me back from the club, not very skillfully but persistently. Lost him on 9th Avenue. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Indeed. Then we are making progress. Only Nero Wolfe would consider being followed a sign of progress. But as I headed out to grab dinner before returning to the Blue Ember for the evening show, I wondered what exactly we were progressing toward. Chapter 3. Forbidden Rhythms. I was finishing my breakfast the next morning when Wolfe entered the dining room at the customary hour. After what I had reported the previous evening, he had done something that always surprised me. He had disturbed his routine. He had instructed me to have Saul Panza come by at 9:30, cutting into his morning session with the orchids. Good morning, I greeted him. Would you like to know what I learned at the club last night? If it's pertinent, he rang for Fritz. Anything of substance? The music was mediocre. Vinnie Keys showed up after midnight, sat at the bar drinking bourbon, and glared at the bandstand like he was auditioning for the role of a man with a grudge. Melody Hayes took her break when he arrived and didn't return for 20 minutes. Wolfe grunted. Fritz appeared with his breakfast. The most interesting thing, I continued, was what wasn't there. Not one photograph of Lux Rollins anywhere in the club. Plenty of other musicians on the walls, but none of him. I asked a waiter about it. He said Lux refused to allow his picture displayed. Peculiar, Wolfe said, for a man in the spotlight business. Wolfe carefully cut into his omelet. Saul will trace Rollins's movements for the week preceding his death. You will visit Rollins's residence. Already got the address from a helpful bartender who thinks I'm writing an article on jazz legends. After breakfast, I met with Saul, whose wizened face looked even more weathered than usual. Wolfe gave him precise instructions and a generous daily rate, then returned to the plant rooms. When the doorbell rang at 11:15, I was surprised to find Melody Hayes on the stoop. I need to talk to you, she said without preamble. Not at the club. I brought her to the office where she perched nervously on the edge of the red leather chair, looking around as if assessing escape routes. Vinnie Keys came asking about you. Last night, after you left. Wanted to know what you were really investigating. What did you tell him? That you were working for Barnes. He didn't believe me. She twisted her hands in her lap. Look, there are things about Lux you should know. He wasn't just a musician. Before she could elaborate, the phone rang. It was Inspector Kramer of Homicide West, announcing his imminent arrival with his customary charm. I told Melody we'd have company soon, and she stood abruptly. I can't be seen here, she insisted. I'll call you. And with that, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and more questions than answers. Kramer arrived 15 minutes later, just as Wolfe was coming down for his 11th wars beer. The inspector had his inevitable cigar, unlit, and his inevitable bad temper, fully ignited. "What's your interest in the Rollins case?" he demanded, not bothering with social pleasantries. "I've been engaged by Mr. Hector Barnes to investigate the death of his employee," Wolfe replied calmly, watching Fritz pour his beer. "Since when do you care about dead jazz musicians?" "I don't. I care about contradictions." Kramer chewed his cigar. "Meaning?" "A man vanishes before an important performance. His body is found with his valuable instrument untouched. His case contains blank paper rather than the composition he was reportedly developing. A torn note suggests a planned midnight meeting that never occurred." Wolfe took a careful sip of beer. "Contradictions abound." "Here's another one for you," Kramer said, leaning forward. "Luther Rollins's fingerprints match a man named Calvin Hayes, supposedly killed in a warehouse fire in 1933. Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, his equivalent of astonishment. "Indeed. Yeah, indeed. So before you get any deeper in this, you should know, it's not just a simple murder case. The feds are interested because of Mr. Stone's former association." Kramer snorted. "Because of the warehouse. It was an FBI operation that went south. 3 agents killed, along with Hayes and 2 others. Or so they thought." After Kramer left, having extracted exactly 0 promises from Wolfe to keep his distance, I departed for Lux Rollins's apartment, with a head full of new questions. The building was better than I expected. A clean, well-maintained brownstone in a respectable part of Harlem. The superintendent let me in after I showed him my license and slipped him a 5. Rollins's apartment was 1 room with a kitchenette and bathroom. Neat, sparsely furnished, no photographs or personal items visible. A rack of expensive suits. A shelf of books on music theory. A high-quality record player with alphabetically organized albums. Too neat. Nothing out of place. Nothing to suggest a life beyond music. I started checking for the usual hiding spots. Under the mattress, behind drawers, inside books. In the toilet tank, I found a waterproof bag containing newspaper clippings about a 1933 gang killing at a warehouse on the Lower East Side. The articles mentioned 3 FBI agents killed in a sting operation gone wrong, along with 3 others, including suspected informant Calvin Hayes. My search was interrupted by the jangling phone. Against better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Goodwin." The voice was male, cultured, with an edge of menace. "Your employer should reconsider his involvement in this matter. Does he get a better offer? Consider this a professional courtesy. Mr. Wolfe is respected, but this situation involves matters beyond his concern. National security interests." "Those are always my favorite kind," I replied. "Would you like to come by the brownstone and explain them to Mr. Wolfe personally?" The line went dead. When I returned to West 35th Street, I found Lily Rowan waiting in the front room, looking as if she had materialized from a fashion magazine. "Hello, Esamilo," she greeted me with the nickname I had never managed to discourage. "I need a favor." "I'm busy with a case." "I know, that's why I'm here." She smiled, the smile that always made me reconsider whatever objection I was forming. "I'm hosting a little gathering tomorrow night. Hector Barnes will be there, and Vincent Morris, and that interesting ex-FBI fellow who manages the Blue Ember." I stared at her. "How do you know these people?" "Darling, I know everyone. Jazz is all the rage now, and I've been a patron of the Blue Ember for months." She handed me an engraved invitation. "Bring Nero if you like, though I know he won't come, but you will. 8 Sao." After she left, I reported my findings to Wolfe. He listened, eyes closed, fingers tapping lightly on the armrest of his chair, a sign that his mental machinery was fully engaged. "Satisfactory," he said when I finished. "Most satisfactory." Chapter 4. Discordant. Testimony Lily. Rowan's little gathering occupied the entire rooftop garden of her midtown apartment building. At least 50 people glittered under strings of lights, drinking champagne and pretending to appreciate the jazz quartet in the corner. I spotted Hector Barnes immediately, holding court near the bar, looking more comfortable in his tuxedo than I felt in mine. I circulated for half an hour before approaching him, pausing to exchange pleasantries with Lily, who was resplendent in a gown that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Esamillo," she murmured as I passed. "That FBI man has been watching you since you arrived. Don't look now." Naturally, I looked. Maxwell Stone stood by the parapet, drink in hand, seemingly engaged in conversation with two society matrons, but his eyes flicked my way and then deliberately elsewhere. He wore his tuxedo like a uniform, stiff and correct. "Any sign of Morris?" I asked Lily, fashionably late as always. "He likes to make an entrance." She squeezed my arm. "Be careful with this crowd. There's something happening beneath the surface." "Isn't there always at your parties?" She rewarded me with a laugh and drifted away to attend to her other guests. I made my way to Barnes, who greeted me with false heartiness. "Goodwin. Didn't expect to see you here. Miss Rowan and I are old friends. I didn't realize your social circle extended to Park Avenue. The music business crosses all boundaries." He lowered his voice. "Any progress?" "Some. Mr. Wolfe is connecting dots." "Well, connect them faster. Business is down 30% since Lux died. People are nervous." "About what?" Barnes took a sip of his champagne. "Word gets around. Customers don't like to drink where people get killed. Unless your customer is Inspector Kramer, they're not likely to get killed at the Blue Ember." "Let's hope not." Barnes nodded to someone over my shoulder. "Ah, here's Vincent. Excuse me?" Vincent Morris had indeed made an entrance. He wore a white dinner jacket that set off his dark skin, and he had a striking woman on his arm, who was not Melody Hayes. As Barnes moved to greet him, I noticed something interesting. Maxwell Stone was watching the exchange with an intensity that seemed excessive for a mere employee observing his boss greeting a business rival. I positioned myself to overhear their conversation, which was mostly mundane pleasantries, until Morris said something that caught my attention. "Told you that arrangement wasn't lost. Lux kept everything up here." He tapped his temple. "Someone knew what they were looking for." Before I could hear more, a waiter approached with a note. "Telephone call for you, sir. You can take it in the lobby." There was no call. When I reached the lobby, Fred Durkin was waiting instead, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed doorman's jacket. "What's so urgent?" I asked. "Been watching Stone like you asked," Fred reported, keeping his voice low. "After he left his apartment today, he met with a guy at a diner on Lexington, Tony Veo." That was interesting. Veo's connected. Small time now, but he used to run with the Mangano family back in the 30s, Fred confirmed. They talked for 20 minutes. Stone passed him an envelope. And nothing. They shook hands and Stone left. I followed Veo. He went to the races. Didn't meet anyone else. I gave Fred some additional instructions and sent him back to his surveillance, then returned to the party. By now, Morris was at the center of an admiring group, while Stone had disappeared from his previous position. I found him at the bar, alone. "Mr. Stone," I said, claiming the stool next to him. "Enjoying the view?" "Parts of it. He sipped his drink. Scotch. Neat. You're wasting your time on this. Case Goodwin? That's what someone told me on the phone yesterday. Anonymous caller mentioned national security. Stone's face remained impassive, but I saw his knuckles whiten around his glass. Smart caller. I'm more interested in why an ex-FBI man is meeting with a former Mangano associate. Now I had his attention. His eyes met mine, cold and professional. You have me followed? Mr. Wolfe is thorough. Tony Veo is an occasional customer at the Yacht Club. He had information about some counterfeit bills that came through the register last week. It was plausible enough. It was also almost certainly a lie. Was Calvin Hayes an informant of yours back in 33? I asked. Stone stood abruptly. The conversation is over. Tell Wolfe to back off, or I'll make some calls that will ensure federal interference in your investigation. Threats don't generally work with Mr. Wolfe. They just make him more interested. Stone straightened his jacket. Then perhaps Mr. Barnes needs to reconsider his retention of Wolfe's services. He left without another word, passing Vincent Morris near the entrance to the rooftop. The two men exchanged looks that contained more animosity than should exist between a club manager and a musician who rarely crossed paths. The rest of the evening yielded few additional insights, though I did overhear a society columnist telling her companion that Melody Hayes used to be quite intimate with Lux, though she used another name back then. When I arrived back at the brownstone shortly, after midnight the light was still on in Wolfe's study. I found him at his desk, not reading his current book as I expected, but examining reports from Saul and Fred that had arrived in my absence. Anything interesting at Miss Rowan's gathering? He inquired, setting down a page. I reported the evening's observations, including the interaction between Stone and Morris and the columnist's comment about Melody Hayes. Saul has discovered something of interest, Wolfe said when I finished. Rollins made a substantial withdrawal from his bank account 3 days before his death, $5,000. Getaway money, perhaps? More intriguing is this. He pushed a piece of paper across the desk. It was a report from Saul describing a meeting he had witnessed between Lux Rollins and Tony Veo the day before the murder. Veo gets around, I remarked. Indeed. And Fred reports that someone entered the brownstone today while we were both absent. That brought me up short. Entered? How? Skillfully. Nothing was disturbed, except for a single orchid pot in the plant rooms, moved approximately 1 inch from its usual position. A calling card, Wolfe said. He looked displeased, which was understandable. The brownstone was his fortress. Tomorrow you will return to the Blue Ember for the evening performance. I want detailed observations of the interactions between all principals. As I headed upstairs to bed, I considered the strange convergence of a dead musician, an ex-FBI man, a mob associate, and a 15-year-old warehouse fire. The melody of this case was becoming increasingly complex, and I had a feeling we were still missing the key signature. Chapter 5. Counterpoint. The next evening, I returned to the Blue Ember with a different approach. Instead of announcing myself as Nero Wolfe's representative, I arrived an hour before opening, slipped the doorman 20, and entered as just another jazz enthusiast. I wore a slightly shabby suit and a hat pulled lower than usual, positioning myself at a corner table with a good view of both the bandstand and the bar. The club filled steadily. Without Lux Rollins, the Blue Ember had lost some luster, but habit and alcohol keep customers loyal longer than you might expect. The replacement. Tenor player was competent but uninspired, like trading a Picasso for a paint by numbers. Melody Hayes worked the floor efficiently, tray balanced on one hand, smile fixed in place. I watched her face when certain songs were played. During most numbers, she maintained professional detachment. But when the band performed a piece called Midnight Confession, her movements faltered noticeably. She recovered quickly, but the slip was there. After her next trip to the bar, I shifted to a stool near where she collected drinks. "That number got to you," I said quietly. Midnight Confession. Her amber eyes flickered with recognition, but she kept her professional smile. "Do I know you, sir?" "We met briefly. I'm investigating. I know who you are." She placed an order with the bartender, then added under her breath, "Not here. There's a coffee shop across the street. I take my break at 10:30. I nursed my drink, watching Vincent Morris arrive around 9. He sat at a table near the stage, listening to the band with obvious disapproval. Occasionally, he'd shake his head or mutter something to his companion, a sharply dressed man I hadn't seen before. At precisely 10 Maxwell Stone emerged from the back office to make a circuit of the room. His eyes swept over me without recognition, which either meant my disguise was effective or he was a better actor than I had given him credit for. When he reached Morris's table, there was a brief, tense exchange that ended with Stone walking away, visibly restraining his temper. I made my way to the stage during a break and struck up a conversation with the piano player, a thin, nervous man named Teddy Wilson. "The new guy's okay," I commented, "but he's no Lux Rollins." "Nobody is," Wilson agreed, lighting a cigarette. "Lux was different." "Different how?" Wilson glanced around before answering. "He heard things nobody else heard. Said music was just patterns, and once you saw the pattern, you could encode anything in it." "Encode? Like a message?" "Yeah, man. Lux was working on something special. Said it was going to be his masterpiece, but not just music. Called it his insurance policy." Wilson tapped his temple. "Kept it all up here. Said paper wasn't safe." "Did he tell anyone what this composition was about?" "Nah. But he was excited and scared at the same time." "You dig? Last few weeks he kept saying it was almost ready." Then Wilson made a gesture like something disappearing. "What's your interest, anyway? You a reporter?" "Just a fan. Hoping someone recorded his last sessions." "Not likely. Stone has a strict no-recording policy. Says it devalues the live experience." At 10:30, I slipped out and crossed to the coffee shop. Melody Hayes was already there, tucked into a back booth, nervously stirring a cup she wasn't drinking. "Make it quick," she said as I sat down. "I've only got 15 minutes. "You knew Lux before he was Lux," I said, not bothering with preliminaries. Her fingers tightened around her cup. "What makes you say that?" "The columnist at Lily Rowan's party, and the way you react to certain songs." Melody's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. "It was a lifetime ago. I was barely 20 when he was Calvin Hayes." Her sharp intake of breath confirmed it. "Who told you that name?" "The police have his fingerprints. It's not exactly a secret anymore." She glanced toward the door. "You don't understand what you're getting into. None of this is about music." "Then what is it about?" "The warehouse fire, 1933. It wasn't what everyone thinks. 3 FBI agents and 3 others died, including Calvin Hayes, supposedly. Cal didn't die. He made a deal." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He was working for both sides, the FBI and Mangano's outfit. When it all went bad, he disappeared. Became Luther Rollins." "And you? Were you Hayes too?" "His sister. I was Diane Hayes then. I didn't see him for 15 years. Thought he was dead, until I spotted him on a magazine cover 3 years ago." She checked her watch. "I have to get back." What was in the composition he was working on? Her eyes widened. You know about that? I know it was important enough to kill for. It wasn't just notes on a page. It was evidence, names, dates, accounts, all encoded in the music. Cal was a genius with patterns. She stood abruptly. I've said too much. Don't come back to the club. They're watching you. After she left, I finished my coffee and considered my next move. Returning to the Blue Ember seemed unwise if I wanted to maintain my cover, but I needed to see something first. I slipped back into the club through the service entrance, making my way toward the storeroom I'd seen during Stone's tour. The corridor was dimly lit and smelled of stale beer. I tried the storeroom door, locked, as expected. It took me 30 seconds with the picks I always carry to remedy that situation. Inside, liquor cases were stacked against the walls. Bar supplies. Filled metal shelves. Nothing unusual, except for a section of wall with slightly different paneling than the rest. I pressed on it experimentally, and a narrow door swung inward, revealing a small room that hadn't been included in the official tour. The hidden room contained dozens of dusty bottles, but these weren't ordinary liquor. They were vintage bootleg from the Prohibition era, each bearing a small symbol etched into the glass, a stylized M, that I recognized from the newspaper clippings about the Mangano family. The sound of voices in the corridor gave me just enough warning to slip out of the hidden room and duck behind a stack of cases. Maxwell Stone and Hector Barnes entered, arguing in hushed but heated tones. "Can't keep this quiet much longer," Barnes was saying. "If Wolfe's man finds out, he won't—" Stone interrupted. "I've handled it. The composition died with Lux." "You're sure? Because if those notes ever surface, they won't—" "Trust me, they—" moved deeper into the storeroom, their voices fading. I took the opportunity to make my exit, carefully relocking the door behind me. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office with a book, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. A sure sign he was thinking, not reading. "You're late," he observed as I entered. "I found something at the club," I replied, and proceeded to tell him about the hidden room, the bootleg bottles, and the conversation I'd overheard. I also relayed my conversation with Melody Hayes, including her revelation about her true identity. Wolfe closed his book. "Interesting? Most interesting." "There's more," I said. "I think Lux, or Calvan, was blackmailing someone. The composition was his insurance policy, against whom I don't know yet. But whoever it was decided to cancel the policy permanently." Chapter 6. The Bridge Passage. The next morning at precisely 11 tucks, Vincent Morris arrived at the brownstone in response to Wolfe's summons. I had phoned him with an invitation that was only technically not a subpoena, suggesting that his cooperation would be more comfortable than his eventual conversation with Inspector Kramer. Morris wore a suit that probably cost twice what I paid for mine, and a faint air of contempt. I led him to the office, where he settled into the red leather chair with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to the best furniture in any room. Wolfe returned from his morning session in the plant rooms, studied our visitor with hooded eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Morris." "Curiosity," Morris replied. "What does Nero Wolfe want with a band leader?" "Information regarding your professional relationship with Luther Rollins." Morris smiled thinly. "Professional rivals, nothing more." "That is not precise," Wolfe countered. "Rivalry implies competition between similar entities. Your establishments cater to different audiences. Your musical styles, while both categorized as jazz, diverge significantly in approach and execution. You know a lot about jazz for a man who rarely leaves his house? I know a great deal about many subjects, Mr. Morris, including the fact that your rivalry with Rollins predated his emergence as a saxophonist. The smile vanished from Morris's face. Meaning what? Meaning that Vincent Morris is not your birth name, just as Luther Rollins was not his. Meaning that you both recreated yourselves after the events of 1933. Morris's composure slipped for just a moment before he recovered. That's an interesting theory. It is a fact, Wolfe replied. Were you present at the warehouse on the night of the fire? Morris stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. You have no authority. Please sit down, Mr. Morris. I merely seek clarity. Archie, give Mr. Morris a copy of the photograph. I handed Morris the grainy newsprint photo Saul had dug up from the archives. A group of musicians from 1932, including a young man identified as Vincent Morgan, whose resemblance to Vincent Morris was unmistakable. Morgan was reported to have connections to the Mangano family, I said helpfully. Convenient pianist for speakeasies during Prohibition. Morris sank back into the chair. Ancient history. Did Rollins steal musical ideas from you? Wolfe asked. Or something more consequential? Look, I've built a life, a reputation. What happened back then is directly connected to Rollins's death, Wolfe finished for him. The composition he was working on. What did it contain? Morris's laugh was bitter. That's what this is about? Lux's masterpiece? You're familiar with it? He bragged about it constantly, said it would change everything when he released it. Called it his life insurance. Morris leaned forward. Let me be clear. I didn't kill Lux. We had history, yes, but I've worked too hard to build what I have. Murder brings heat I don't need. What was your birth name, Mr. Morris? Wolfe asked. We're done here. Morris stood again, and this time he moved toward the door. I've got nothing more to say. After he left, I turned to Wolfe. Think he's telling the truth about not killing Lux? Partially. I doubt he personally wielded the murder weapon, but his involvement in this affair runs deeper than he admits. At 1, Melody Hayes arrived for her appointment. She had abandoned her waitress uniform for a modest blue dress that did nothing to diminish her appeal. She perched nervously on the edge of the red leather chair, as if ready to flee at the slightest provocation. Miss Hayes, Wolfe began. Or should I say, Miss Diane Hayes? I haven't used that name in 15 years. Yet you sought employment at the club where your brother performed? Why? She twisted her hands in her lap. To warn him. When I saw his picture in that magazine, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else recognized him too. Someone connected to the warehouse incident. Yes. 3 FBI agents died that night, along with 2 of Mangano's men. Everyone thought Cal died too, but he had struck a deal with an agent named Stone. I supplied, she said. Maxwell Stone was a junior agent. Then he helped Cal disappear, gave him a new identity. In exchange, Cal provided testimony that helped the Bureau build cases against several Mangano operations. But something went wrong, Wolfe prompted. Stone was supposed to protect the other agents, but they walked into an ambush. Cal always believed Stone had tipped off Mangano's people. And the composition? Wolfe asked. Cal had evidence. Dates, names, account numbers, all from 1933. He encoded it into his music. Said if anything happened to him, the composition would be his testimony from the grave. Yet the music sheets in his case were blank, I pointed out. He wouldn't have written it down until it was finished. But he recorded it. Her eyes darted between us. There's a record, a single pressing. He told me about it the night before he died. After Melody left, Wolfe summoned Maxwell Stone for $3. Stone arrived precisely on time, looking more like an FBI agent than a club manager in his severe gray suit. I assume this is about Rollins. Calvin Hayes, Wolfe corrected. Your former informant. Stone's face remained impassive. I have no idea what you're talking about. That is not true, Mr. Stone. In 1933, you were a junior FBI agent involved in operations against the Mangano family. You recruited Calvin Hayes as an informant, then facilitated his disappearance and new identity after the warehouse fire. Pure speculation. Miss Diane Hayes has confirmed it. A muscle twitched in Stone's jaw, the only indication that Wolfe's words had affected him. Diane Hayes died in 1940, car accident in Ohio. Another fabricated death, Wolfe noted. You are adept at erasing people. Mr. Stone, I'm leaving. This conversation is over. As you wish. But be advised that Inspector Kramer will receive a full report of my findings thus far. The fingerprint match between Rollins and Hayes has already piqued the Bureau's interest. I imagine they will be quite intrigued by your connection to the case. Stone paused at the door. You're playing with fire, Wolfe. National security isn't a game for private detectives. After Stone's departure, Saul Panza called to report his latest findings. According to an elderly musician he'd tracked down, during Prohibition, certain musical compositions had indeed been used to encode information about liquor shipments, dates, locations, quantities, all hidden within seemingly innocent arrangements. That pattern again, I said after hanging up. Lux was using an old Prohibition trick to hide modern evidence. Wolfe nodded thoughtfully. We must retrieve that recording. Where would Rollins have hidden his most valuable possession? Not at his apartment. I searched it thoroughly. I considered the problem. Maybe with someone he trusted. Not the club, not with Stone. Perhaps another musician, Wolfe suggested. I grabbed my hat. I'm going to have another talk with that piano player, Teddy Wilson. The address Wilson had given me was a shabby rooming house in the East Village. The landlady informed me he wasn't expected back until late. As I turned to leave, I noticed a man watching from across the street, the same sharp-dressed companion who had been with Morris at the club. I decided to take a less direct route back to the brownstone. But as I rounded the corner into an alley I used as a shortcut, a car engine roared to life. Headlights blinded me as the vehicle accelerated in my direction. I dove between two parked cars just as it sped past, missing me by inches. By the time I recovered and drew my gun, the car was gone, leaving only the smell of burning rubber and the hammering of my heart. Chapter 7. The format I reported the attempt on my life to Wolfe when I returned to the brownstone. Slightly scraped, but otherwise intact. Most unsatisfactory, he commented, his lips compressed to a thin line. This escalation suggests we are approaching a conclusion. Or a dead end, if they succeed next time, I replied cheerfully. My money's on Morris's man as the driver, perhaps. Wolfe's finger tapped once on his desk, a rare sign of genuine agitation. Your safety is paramount, Archie. Until this matter is resolved, I suggest you remain vigilant. Coming from Wolfe, this was practically a tearful expression of concern. I was touched. The doorbell interrupted our moment. Inspector Kramer entered without waiting for Fritz to announce him, his unlit cigar clamped more firmly than usual between his teeth. I've got news that might interest you, he announced, lowering himself into the red leather chair without invitation. The lab found traces of blood on a brick wall behind the Blue Ember Club, matches Rollins's type. He wasn't killed in that alley. He was moved there. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. And the murder weapon, still missing? But we found something else. Kramer produced a small evidence bag containing a brass key. This was in Rollins's jacket pocket. Not his apartment, not his locker at the club. Any ideas? Wolfe examined the key without touching the bag. Perhaps a storage unit or a safe deposit box. We're checking. Meanwhile, I've got the commissioner breathing down my neck. The FBI is sniffing around because of this Maxwell Stone connection. Kramer leaned forward. What have you got, Wolfe? I know that look. Merely conjectures at this point, Inspector. When I have proof, you will be the first to know. This transparent lie seemed to satisfy Kramer, who left after extracting a promise from Wolfe to share any significant developments. The promise was worthless, of course, but it made Kramer feel better to have it. After he departed, I called Saul and instructed him to check safe deposit boxes at banks near the Blue Ember. Then, I phoned Teddy Wilson and arranged to meet him the following morning at a coffee shop far from his rooming house. That key is significant, Wolfe declared. It may lead us to the recording or to another dead end. I count on you. I'm more interested in why the murder scene was staged. Moving a body takes effort and increases risk. Why not leave him where he fell? Perhaps to conceal evidence of another crime, or to implicate a particular location. The phone rang and I answered to find Hector Barnes on the line, his voice tense. Goodwin, we need to talk. The police were here with a search warrant. They're tearing the place apart. What are they looking for? They didn't say, but they're focusing on the storeroom. There was a pause. If they find that back room, we'll be over in 30 minutes, I said, knowing full well that Wolfe would never agree to leave the brownstone for this. We? Wolfe inquired after I hung up. A tactical use of the plural, I admitted. The police are searching the Blue Ember, particularly the storeroom. Barnes is nervous about that hidden room with the vintage bootleg. As he should be, Wolfe replied. However, I doubt that is their primary focus. Return to the club and observe. Do not announce your presence to the police. I arrived at the Blue Ember to find 2 police cars parked outside and the front door, guarded by a uniformed officer. Rather than announce myself, I slipped around to the alley and found the service entrance unguarded. Inside, I could hear the commotion of the search coming from the direction of the storeroom. I made my way toward Barnes's office instead. The door was ajar and voices drifted out. Barnes and Stone in another heated discussion. I told you this would happen, Stone was saying. We should have cleared everything out after Lux was killed. Raised suspicion. Besides, those bottles are worth a fortune to collectors. They're evidence linking you directly to Mangano. Ancient history. Barnes scoffed. The statute of limitations ran out decades ago. Not on murder, Stone replied coldly. I shifted position to get a better view through the crack in the door. Barnes was behind his desk, looking pale. Stone stood before him, rigid with tension. They won't find anything, Barnes insisted. Lux was too smart for that. The record isn't here. Lux was too smart for that. The record is the least of our concerns now, Stone said. If they start digging into the warehouse fire, that's your problem, not mine. I was just a supplier back then. You were more than that, Barnes shot back, and we both know it. Your family connections. A noise from the hallway forced me to retreat before I could hear the rest. I ducked into an alcove as several officers emerged from the storeroom carrying evidence boxes. Following them was Inspector Kramer, looking grimly satisfied. I waited until they had passed, then slipped out the way I had come. Outside, I observed them loading the boxes into a police van. One officer carried something distinctive, a section of wall paneling from the hidden room. Back at the brownstone, I reported what I had seen and heard to Wolfe. He listened with his eyes half closed, fingers tapping lightly together over his substantial middle. Most illuminating. The connections become clearer. Barnes's family had ties to Mangano. He was not merely a bootleg supplier but involved in the warehouse operation. Stone, as a junior FBI agent, was also connected to that night, and both are concerned about this recording, which we still haven't found. I pointed out, perhaps Mr. Wilson will provide insight tomorrow. Meanwhile, I have arranged for all concerned parties to gather here tomorrow evening at 9, all of them. Including Kramer? Not the inspector. Not yet. I require one final piece of evidence before involving official authorities. The next morning, I met Teddy Wilson at the coffee shop as arranged. He looked nervous, his long fingers drumming continuously on the tabletop. "I've been thinking about what you asked," he said after I bought him coffee. "About where Lux might have hidden something important. And there's a record shop on 47th Street, Groove Master Records. Lux was tight with the owner, a guy named Benny Silverman. Used to spend hours there listening to rare pressings." I thanked Wilson and headed straight to Groove Master Records, a cramped shop crammed with thousands of records in dusty sleeves. The owner, a bald man with thick glasses, regarded me suspiciously until I mentioned Lux. "Terrible thing," he said, shaking his head. "Real tragedy for music." I understand he was a regular customer. Friend, not customer. Lux had an ear like nobody else, could hear patterns no one else could. "Did he leave anything with you? For safekeeping, maybe?" Silverman's expression closed. "Who's asking?" I handed him my card. "Nero Wolfe is investigating his death." After a long moment, Silverman nodded. "There's a record. Came in the day before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should play it for the right person." He studied me. "Don't know if that's you." "It is," I assured him. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a plain sleeve containing a single black record with no label. One pressing, made it himself. When I reached for it, he pulled it back. He said to ask one question. Who was playing piano the night the warehouse burned? It was a test. And fortunately, I knew the answer from our investigations. Vincent Morgan, now known as Vincent Morris. Silverman handed over the record. "Be careful with this, mister. It got Lux killed." I secured the record inside my coat and left the shop, checking carefully for followers. 3 blocks away, I spotted the same sharp-dressed man who had been watching Wilson's place. He was good, but not good enough to hide in the morning crowd. I ducked into a department store, exited through a side entrance, and doubled back via an alley. When he followed, I was waiting. After a brief, persuasive conversation that left him nursing a bloody nose, he confirmed he worked for Vincent Morris and had been tasked with following me. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe and I listened to the record on his rarely used phonograph. What emerged was a hauntingly beautiful saxophone solo, unlike anything I'd ever heard. To my untrained ear, it was just music. Complex and emotional, but just music. Wolfe, however, listened with complete concentration, his eyes closed, fingers occasionally moving as if conducting. When the record ended, he opened his eyes. "Remarkable," he said softly. The evidence was there all along, hidden in plain hearing. Chapter 8. The Final Cadence. At precisely 9 the following evening, our invited guests began to arrive at the brownstone. Fritz ushered them into the office where Wolfe sat behind his desk, massive and imperturbable. He had spent most of the day with the record, playing it repeatedly while making notes that he refused to share with me. Hector Barnes arrived first, immaculately dressed but visibly tense. Maxwell Stone followed minutes later, his face a professional mask betraying nothing. Melody Hayes, or Diane as we now knew her, entered with obvious reluctance, taking a yellow chair as far from Stone as possible. Vincent Morris was the last to arrive, fashionably late, wearing an expression of bored disdain. I had positioned myself near the door, partly out of habit and partly to prevent any premature departures. Saul Panza was stationed in the hall as additional insurance. Wolfe surveyed the assembled group, his gaze resting briefly on each face. "Thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the murder of Luther Rollins, known previously as Calvin Hayes." Barnes shifted uncomfortably. "I thought this was about the police search of my club." "The two matters are inseparable," Wolfe replied. "When Mr. Barnes engaged my services, he presented the case as a simple murder investigation. It has proved to be considerably more complex, involving identities fabricated over 15 years ago, a Prohibition-era warehouse fire, and a musical composition containing encoded evidence." Stone's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped the armrest of his chair. "What evidence?" Morris demanded. "Patience, Mr. Morris, or should I say Mr. Morgan, all will be explained." Wolfe adjusted his position slightly, the chair creaking beneath his weight. "Let us begin with established facts. In 1933, 3 FBI agents and apparently 3 civilians died in a warehouse fire during an operation targeting the Mangano crime family. I say apparently because at least one of those presumed dead, Calvin Hayes, survived and was given a new identity by Agent Maxwell Stone. "This is ancient history," Stone interjected, "and potentially classified information." "History often illuminates the present," Wolfe responded. "Calvin Hayes became Luther Rollins, a saxophonist of considerable talent. Another survivor of that night, Vincent Morgan, became Vincent Morris, a bandleader of some renown. Both men reinvented themselves, but neither could entirely escape the past." "This is absurd," Morris protested. "I have no connection to any warehouse fire." "You played piano for the Mangano family during Prohibition," Wolfe continued unperturbed. "Your skills were useful, not only for entertainment, but for encoding information about shipments and musical arrangements, a technique Mr. Rollins later adapted for his own purposes. The warehouse operation went catastrophically wrong," Wolfe continued. 3 FBI agents died in what was supposedly a surprise raid on a Mangano liquor storage facility. But it wasn't a surprise to the Mangano men, was it, Mr. Stone? They were waiting. Stone's expression finally cracked. "That's a lie. Hayes was a 2-bit informant trying to play both sides." "Please sit down, Mr. Stone. Your denials are futile. Calvin Hayes encoded the truth in his final composition, which we recovered yesterday." "Music can't prove anything," Stone scoffed, but he sank back into his chair. "On the contrary," Wolfe replied. "The composition contains patterns that, when properly interpreted, reveal specific details, dates, names, account numbers. Mr. Rollins was a mathematical prodigy with an extraordinary memory. He witnessed not only your betrayal of your fellow agents, but also the involvement of another key figure." Wolfe's gaze shifted to Barnes. Barnes paled. "I had nothing to do with any murders." "Perhaps not directly," Wolfe agreed. "But as the nephew of Joseph Mangano, you were uniquely positioned to serve as liaison between the family and certain corrupt officials. The warehouse contained not only liquor, but financial records documenting bribes paid to police and federal agents, including Mr. Stone." The room fell silent. I kept my hand near my holster, watching Stone, whose calm facade had completely crumbled. "When Diane Hayes recognized her brother and sought him out," Wolfe continued, "it precipitated a crisis. If Calvin revealed what he knew, careers would be ruined, and long-dormant murder charges would be revived. The composition he was creating was his insurance policy, evidence preserved in a form only he could interpret. But Wolfe can interpret it too, I added helpfully. He's been studying it all day. Indeed, Wolfe confirmed. The musical patterns contain a cipher that, once recognized, reveals detailed information about the warehouse operation, the agents involved, and the subsequent cover-up. When Mr. Rollins announced he was completing this work, it became an imminent threat. "So who killed him?" Morris asked, glancing between Barnes and Stone. "Mr. Stone arranged the murder," Wolfe said, using his connections to Tony Veo, the same man he warned about the raid 15 years ago. But the actual killing was performed by someone with access to the club, someone who could approach Rollins without arousing suspicion. All eyes turned to Barnes, who was now visibly sweating. "Not Mr. Barnes," Wolfe corrected. "He merely provided the venue and assisted in concealing evidence afterward. The killer was Mr. Morris." Morris leapt to his feet. "That's preposterous. I was performing at the Ruby Room, 50 witnesses." "You began your performance there," Wolfe agreed. "But there was a 40-minute break between sets, ample time to visit the Blue Ember, confront Rollins behind the club, and return. As a musician, you understood exactly what his composition represented. As Vincent Morgan, you stood to lose everything if the truth about the warehouse fire emerged." "You can't prove any of this," Morris snarled. "The police laboratory can," Wolfe replied. "Fibers from your distinctive white jacket were found on the brick wall where Rollins was killed. And the key found in his pocket, it opens a storage locker at Grand Central Terminal, rented in the name of Vincent Morgan 15 years ago, and maintained ever since." Stone suddenly bolted for the door, but Saul was faster, stepping into the doorway with his gun drawn. I had mine out as well, covering Morris, who looked ready to attempt something equally foolish. "Archie, please call Inspector Kramer," Wolfe instructed. "Inform him that we have 2 confessions to record." It took hours to sort everything out. Kramer arrived with reinforcements. Statements were taken and arrests were made. It was nearly 3:00 in the morning when the police finally departed, taking Stone, Barnes, and Morris with them. Melody Hayes, having been granted immunity for her cooperation, left with a tearful thank you and the record of her brother's final composition. The next morning, after breakfast, I found Wolfe in the plant rooms with Theodore, tending to his orchids with his usual meticulous care. "Barnes has issued a full confession," I informed him. "Stone and Morris are still claiming innocence, but the evidence is overwhelming." "Satisfactory," Wolfe murmured, carefully inspecting a bloom. "You never explained how you deciphered the music," I said. "I listened to that record a dozen times and heard nothing but saxophone." "The patterns were there, for those who knew how to perceive them," Wolfe replied. "Notes become numbers, phrases become names, rhythms become dates." During Prohibition, such codes were essential for conducting illicit business securely, and Lux adapted the system to preserve evidence instead of hiding shipment details, precisely a fitting use of his mathematical and musical genius. Wolfe gently adjusted a plant's position. "A great talent lost to old grudges and buried secrets." Later that day, I typed the final report on the case, documenting the complex web of deceptions and murders spanning 15 years. When I finished, I found Wolfe in the office, reading peacefully, as if men with secrets in their past hadn't recently occupied his yellow chairs. "Another satisfactory conclusion?" I asked. Wolfe marked his place in his book before answering. "Justice has been approximated, if not perfectly achieved. The truth, after years of concealment, has emerged. Yes, Archie, I would call that satisfactory. He returned to his book, and I to my desk, as the brownstone settled back into its accustomed routine, awaiting the next contradiction that would disturb Nero Wolfe's ordered world. Thanks for joining us for the case of the missing tenor sax. Did you suspect Vincent Morris was the killer before Wolfe revealed the connection between the musical code and the warehouse fire? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Wolfe's wisdom. Justice has been approximated, if not perfectly achieved. The truth, after years of concealment, has emerged. Sometimes the most brilliant solutions come from recognizing the patterns that others miss. And the most dangerous secrets are those encoded in plain sight. This is Alie, signing off from Café Tales.